You know, have you ever noticed how often when a new team or like a project kicks off, there's this huge urge to just jump straight into the action?
Oh, absolutely. Get things moving.
Yeah, exactly. We're so focused on the strategy, the tasks, the results right now. But what if in that big rush, we're actually skipping over the most, I don't know, powerful part, the real foundation? Like imagine holding a tiny seed, right? It could become this huge tree, but it's just dormant. It seems like we often race past that moment wanting the tree without really respecting the seed.
That's a great way to put it.
So what if those very first moments of a team coming together, the stuff we usually brush off as just logistics, the awkward intros, what if that holds the real key to like unstoppable growth and making a lasting impact?
Yeah.
So today, here on The Deep Dive, our mission is really to unpack why this forming stage isn't just a quick check-the-box kickoff. We think it's maybe a really intentional season, a time for building shared purpose and connection that unlocks, well, truly transformative stuff for any team. Okay, so let's unpack this. What if those first connections, those sometimes kind of awkward first steps, are actually the most fertile ground for success down the line?
It's absolutely true. And when we think about forming differently, redefine it a bit.
Yeah.
It's not just getting the right talent in the room or handing out roles. It's really about building deep alignment, cultivating an environment where collaboration, where innovation can actually multiply. And neglecting this, especially now in this, crazy, fast-changing world, it has real costs.
Like what?
Well, you see misaligned expectations all the time. Trust gets fractured almost before it starts. And good initiatives, they pop up, sure, but then they just wither under the first sign of pressure.
Right. No roots.
Exactly, no roots. And this matters now, I think, more than ever. We've got constant change, AI is shifting roles, teams are spread out globally, making connection harder. And stakeholders, they want real authenticity, not just talk. So in this climate, the teams that actually pause to listen for that collective wisdom, to weave individual passions into the bigger purpose.
Okay.
And intentionally build that foundation before jumping into tasks. Those are the teams that are going to last. They'll outlast the ones that just sprint ahead without really being anchored. And here's the fresh insight, maybe. What used to feel like a roadblock, that uncertainty, the awkwardness, maybe some ambiguity, that actually becomes your biggest asset.
How so?
Because it forces you to build something real, something sustainable, something purpose-driven, not just efficient.
That's a really powerful reframing. It makes me think, how many older wisdom traditions, like from ancient philosophers to early communities, they put huge emphasis on the beginning, the genesis of a group.
They did.
Like those moments were seen as these sacred thresholds almost, where the real potential gets unlocked.
Absolutely. Think about creation stories. So many cultures have them. Before anything is made functional, it's first formed. In the Genesis account, for instance, the earth was formless and void, right? But the spirit was hovering, present, anticipating. Creation didn't start with doing, it started with that intentional hovering. Presence before performance.
Presence before performance. I like that.
Gives us this foundational principle. Deep formation comes before true fruitfulness. Like a potter shaping the clay before firing it. Strong groups, they shape their culture, their relationships before they empower action.
Okay.
So for us, that means forming should prioritize that shared presence, that connection, over just jumping into productivity. Are we actually building trust together before we start whiteboarding strategies?
That makes sense.
And then you look at historical examples like that early community in Acts 13. That's like a living model for purpose-driven forming.
How so?
Well, it wasn't a corporate recruitment drive, right? It was this moment of collective discernment. The leaders were deep in reflection, shared practices, fasting, worship, and they got this sense, this conviction to set apart Barnabas and Saul for the work. So the key insights there are pretty clear. First, that deep sense of individual calling, it comes before the specific role. They saw the calling in them first.
Right. They were recognized, not just assigned.
Exactly. And second, the community validates the purpose. The group discerned it. They didn't just manufacture it. And third, those deep shared practices, reflection, listening, they were foundational. It wasn't built just on skills, but on this deep sense of shared spirit.
powerful.
And then, of course, you have Jesus forming his core group, the 12. When he called them, he wasn't just, putting together a task force.
Yeah.
He was inviting them into this transformation through relationship, through shared experience. When he said, follow me and I will make you fishers of men, that I will make you, that's not a job description.
No, it's a promise.
It's a promise of formation, personal and collective. And look who he chose. A real mix, right? Fishermen, a tax collector, zealots. People who normally wouldn't even talk to each other.
Yeah, definitely diverse.
Yeah.
Even conflicting, maybe.
For sure. But he built that shared identity before he gave them specific authority. The whole process was deeply relational, often messy, let's be real,
I bet.
but profoundly transformative. And what's fascinating, I think, is how Jesus' way of forming was, slow, deliberate, relational, dependent on purpose and spirit. He embedded the culture, the kingdom culture, before empowering kingdom action.
So, okay, pulling that thread through
Yeah.
from creation stories to these early communities, the pattern seems really clear. Formation is foundational. It's deeply relational. And it's way, way more than just logistics.
Precisely.
Which brings us, I think, to a pretty fundamental shift in how we need to understand forming. Because most modern leadership thinking treats it like a logistical step, right? Get the right people, outline the vision, assign the roles, go.
Standard playbook.
Yeah. But in these transformative movements, these examples you've given, forming isn't primarily about that kind of configuration. It's about something deeper, like dedication or alignment.
Exactly. That's the core distinction. Configuration, it relies mostly on human logic. Who's got the skills? Who adds strategic value? How do we balance personalities? Which roles do we need filled? And look, it sounds wise, right?
Yeah, it sounds practical.
It does, but it subtly puts human control and immediate usefulness at the center. Consecration, or maybe dedication and alignment, like you said, it asks different questions. It asks, who is really deeply committed to this shared purpose? Where is that sense of shared energy and peace actually emerging? What vital thing are we really stepping into together?
That's a very different starting point.
It is. Think about the concept of the person of peace, or maybe like a natural connector. You see this idea in lots of successful community building or movement strategies.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, the idea is you look for individuals who are naturally receptive to the core idea, people who show genuine openness, who already have some social influence in their network, and crucially, who respond with a willingness to actually engage, to do something.
Right, they lean in.
They lean in. So in many successful grassroots movements, team formation doesn't start with who you choose from a list. It often starts with whom the shared purpose naturally reveals as the key champions.
Ah, so it's more discovery than selection.
Exactly. They aren't just recruits with skills. They're like fertile ground where connection and growth can happen organically. And in practice, you see these really effective movements forming teams through these like organic, purpose-driven rhythms. They often start with sharing stories, personal testimonies. That builds real trust, real vulnerability.
Makes sense.
They establish foundational principles, maybe using core stories or guiding philosophies to create a shared lens, a shared way of seeing things. There's often a simplicity to the action step, not what great ideas do you have, but okay, what will you commit to do this week?
Action-oriented.
Very. And they set up mutual agreements, simple collaborative understandings that emphasize community and shared responsibility over rigid rules. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, these models show that deep forming, it isn't some luxury you do if you have time.
No, it sounds like the engine.
It is the engine of sustained movement, what you build right there in the beginning that determines how far the whole initiative can actually go.
Wow. Oh. Okay, that's a huge shift in perspective. And I can see how that changes everything for leadership in that initial stage. Because the temptation is always just to organize, right? Manage the process. I know I feel that pressure.
Oh, absolutely. It's the default mode for many of us. But leadership in this forming stage, it's really less like being an architect with a blueprint.
And more like?
More like a gardener. You have to shift from just assembling resources to discerning those natural connections, stewarding the team's atmosphere, nurturing the invisible things, trust, shared purpose, personal commitment. Forming isn't a management problem you solve. It's a living environment you tend.
A living environment to be tended. I like that. So what does that look like practically, this gardening?
Well, I think it involves maybe 4 core practices. First, really consciously setting the intentional atmosphere. Before you even talk tasks, create a shared awareness that something meaningful is happening here.
Okay.
That means creating rhythms for deep listening, for shared reflection, maybe activities that just build that collective identity. The best collaborations only emerge when the atmosphere feels right, when there's respect and attentiveness.
Makes sense. What's second?
Second is clarifying purpose. In the forming stage, knowing why you exist together is way more crucial than knowing exactly how you'll do everything. So articulate the mission in language that connects with people, that's human-centered. Use collective discernment to shape it. Anchor that shared identity before you get lost in functions and roles. Purpose isn't just a bullet point, it's a shared discovery.
Okay. Atmosphere, purpose. What else?
Third is welcoming stories. Every single person joining a team brings their own history, right? Their experiences, hopes, challenges. Good leaders make space for those stories. Well, think about a leader who actually takes time to listen, to understand someone's motivations, their perspective, before just assigning them tasks. We need to create spaces where people can share their personal journey, what really drives them.
Like beneath the surface.
Exactly. And fourth, naming values. Look, culture happens whether you plan it or not, so you have to be intentional. Establish those core principles early, root things like humility, interdependence, growth, authenticity in the team's DNA from the start.
Why so early?
Because when values are named early, they become anchors when conflict hits. They become filters when you have tough decisions to make. You can use practical tools here like vision and values workshops or team chartering sessions, maybe weekly shared reflection times. These aren't just meetings, they're acts of collaborative design.
Right, they're formational acts.
Precisely, and it really makes you ask that hard question. Are you building a team that can weather storms? Or one that just looks good on paper today but will crack under real pressure? What enduring qualities are you actually forming beneath the surface?
That is a crucial question. Because, man, the temptation to just skip this, to get to the good stuff, like you said, it's almost irresistible sometimes.
It really is.
But it sounds like when we bypass forming, we're not just skipping a step, we're basically undermining the entire foundation.
That's exactly right. And the dangers are, well, they're profound. First off, you get superficial relationships. Unity without any depth, it's incredibly fragile. Relationships stay transactional. They get torn apart easily by the first whiff of conflict. Think about any really high-performing group. Their unity wasn't just task agreement. It was forged in shared vulnerability, shared commitment.
Right.
Without that, leaders get blindsided when someone leaves unexpectedly or collaboration just breaks down when things get stressful.
Okay, so superficial relationships. What else?
Second, you get unrealistic expectations. All those unspoken assumptions people bring, they become like landmines waiting to go off.
Yeah, you can see that.
You know the saying, can two walk together unless they are agreed? If you skip forming, everyone imports their own expectations about roles, about effort, about communication, and boom, collision, burnout. Team members get frustrated because roles were fuzzy. Leaders get burned out because they feel like others aren't pulling their weight. Taking time for a clear team charter or just a mutual agreement isn't bureaucracy. It's creating relational clarity. It's rooted in that shared purpose we talked about.
Okay, makes sense. Any others?
Yeah, a third big risk is unseen fractures. Busyness, it can mask a lot of underlying tension or misalignment.
Right. You don't notice until it's too late.
Exactly. Unresolved issues, maybe unaddressed wounds or different understandings of the mission, they just lie dormant until a crisis hits. And then things fall apart. You see teams lose steam after 6 months, or leaders struggle to handle underperformance because that foundational understanding was never built. And skipping forming, it also makes that inevitable storming phase, when conflict naturally arises, it makes it destructive instead of constructive.
How so?
Well, conflict is actually necessary for growth, right? Teams need to wrestle with differences. But if you don't have that relational foundation, that shared understanding built during forming, conflict doesn't purify, it pulverizes. Think about Jesus' disciples again. They had intense disagreements, betrayals, failures, but they could regroup. Why? Because of the deep relational equity they'd built over time during their formation. They were ultimately refined by conflict, not broken by it.
Wow. That really drives home the point. Slow is fast, especially when you're trying to build something that needs to last. Like building a temple, something meant to endure that takes time and care, unlike just throwing up a prefab shed.
Exactly. Well said.
Now, okay, someone listening might be thinking, this sounds great for like a volunteer group or spiritual community, but what about my team? In a corporate boardroom,
Mm,
or a really fast-paced nonprofit?
yeah, fair question.
Does this still apply? I mean, whether it's a boardroom or a community meeting room, it feels like this forming stage is essential ground, right? These principles must apply wherever people gather around some kind of shared mission.
Precisely. The context changes, but the human dynamics, the principles of group formation, they're remarkably consistent. From ancient history to modern organizational best practices, you see this pattern. Shared identity comes before activity. Strong relationships come before rigid structures. Deep intentionality comes before effective execution.
Okay.
And skipping that pattern, it just short-circuits long-term fruitfulness, no matter the setting.
So how does it look different in, say, the marketplace?
Okay, so in the marketplace, it might look like purpose before productivity, really starting with the why. The shared purpose, the vision, the collective impact you want to have, that shifts people from just doing their job, compliance, to having real conviction. Ask questions like, why does this work truly matter to you? Then maybe storytelling as trust building. Don't just utilize people, invite them to be known. Maybe you do sessions like the story behind the resume, where people share their personal journeys, their motivations.
Interesting.
And finally, ethical anchoring over expedient outcomes. Align the team around core values, integrity, maybe generosity, service, not just hitting the quarterly numbers. This builds that long-term resilience, reputation, and frankly, meaning.
Okay. What about, say, a startup or a church plan, something new being born?
Yeah, great examples. There it might mean a dedicated season of intentional preparation. Just like founders might spend weeks refining their pitch deck, maybe there's a, say, 40-day period of focused brainstorming, deep research, really aligning the core vision before launching.
Dedicated time.
Exactly. And also build relational commitments, not just task forces.
Yeah.
Focus on trust, mutual accountability, shared support. Like actually talk about how you'll make decisions together, how you'll handle conflict when it inevitably rises. Write it down maybe.
Right, like a team agreement.
Yeah. And for nonprofits, it's often about putting values first, strategy later, to fight that common burnout and mission drift. Maybe holding foundations retreats where the team steps back and reflects on the core motivations, the shared beliefs driving the work.
Okay.
And also, invite deeper reflection. Don't just talk about what you do, but how and why it matters in light of, say, broader societal impact or human well-being. Maybe share readings on social justice or sustainability relevant to your work.
That brings up a challenging question, though, doesn't it?
Which is,
Well, what fears pop up for you, the listener, when you think about slowing down like this, prioritizing this deeper formation over just getting stuff done? Are those fears based on a real need for speed, or maybe a fear of looking unproductive or irrelevant?
That's a really important question to sit with. What's really driving the agency?
Yeah. It really brings us back to that seed metaphor we started with. Forming isn't just getting ready for the mission. It feels like forming is part of the mission itself. It's integral.
It absolutely is. It is the seed before the harvest.
Yeah.
And the pattern, it's unmistakable across so many growth cycles, isn't it? You see it in Genesis. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Blessing, alignment, intentionality that often comes before the multiplying, before the big results. Deep dedication precedes effective execution. Forming is fundamentally about becoming a cohesive group, not just building a structure. Teams that are really intentionally formed, they're built on that shared purpose, on character, on those mutual agreements we talked about, not just on skills.
So it involves.
It involves discerning who's truly aligned with the core purpose, rather than just assembling talent that looks good on paper. A team formed by shared vision actually fulfills the purpose. It doesn't just complete tasks.
Right.
It means making space for vulnerability, for sharing stories. Resilience studies often point to the power of narrative they overcame by the word of their testimony. Without those shared stories, where's the shared strength? And it means cultivating those intentional practices, communal reflection, focused brainstorming, shared learning. These aren't just formalities. They are the very means of deep team alignment.
And rushing the seed. Rushing this process.
Well, the dangers are real, like we said. It leads to shallow roots, that fragile unity that just snaps under pressure. It causes vision drift where our immediate human plans push out the deeper collective purpose we started with.
Yeah.
And it creates all those unspoken assumptions which become breeding grounds for disappointment and conflict when clarity wasn't established right at the beginning.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening right now? I guess the message is, don't shortcut what your team truly needs to build something deep, something sustainable. Forming isn't wasted time. It's actually the fertile ground for everything that comes next.
Exactly. So here's a thought to maybe just mull over, to explore on your own. What if the most strategic thing you could do this quarter isn't launching that big new project? What if it's actually lingering?
Hmm.
Lingering in that space of deep collaborative reflection with your team, rediscovering the powerful potential you've already begun to cultivate together, maybe without even realizing it.
That's a powerful challenge.
Hmm.
Are you building a team that'll last through the storms? Or one that looks impressive today, but maybe cracks under pressure tomorrow? What seeds are you planting right now that will outlive you?
Hmm.
We really encourage you to reflect on your own forming story, the teams you've been part of, the ones you lead, and think about how you can apply these deeply rooted principles, whether that's in your work, your community, even your family. It seems these ideas have relevance everywhere.